Picture a first meeting. Not a booking, not work, just someone new. You sit down, exchange a few words, and within seconds, something in you has already registered. The tone of their voice, the pace of their speech, the specific quality of their presence. Something subtle, but precise. And before the conversation has even fully begun, you have already adjusted. Your tone softens, your rhythm shifts, you leave a little bit more space, or a little less. You match them without deciding to, before they have said anything about how they feel. And they don't notice, because it's seamless, because it always is. But you notice, afterwards, when the interaction ends, and something in you remains slightly engaged. And the thought comes, I was working, even here. It wasn't always like this. It became like this. And that difference is what this episode is about. Welcome to Psychologist for Escorts. I'm Eva Valora. And if you do this work or have done it, this is a space built specifically for you, for what you carry, for what you navigate, and for what you deserve to understand about yourself. In the last episode, we looked at emotional labor, not as performance, not as being kind or warm or good with people, but as regulation, internal regulation, in response to someone else's experience. We looked at how that regulation becomes automatic over time. How what once required effort eventually requires none. How what once felt like a skill starts to feel like who you are. And we ended with one question left open. What happens when that regulation only moves in one direction? When you are always the one tracking, always the one adjusting, always the one stabilizing, without that movement being returned. That's where this episode begins. In most forms of connection, there's a subtle exchange. You respond to someone and they respond to you. Not perfectly, not always consciously, but the movement goes both ways. You attune to them, they attune to you. And in that back and forth, something happens in the nervous system. It regulates, not just the interaction, itself. Because when attunement is mutual, the system doesn't have to carry the whole weight of the interaction alone. There is return. There is something coming back, a response, a signal that says, I see you, I'm here too. And that signal allows the system to release, to come back towards baseline, to complete the cycle. Think of it like breathing. Inhale, you extend towards someone. Exhale, something returns. The cycle completes, and the body rests briefly before the next breath. But when reciprocity is absent, that exhale doesn't fully come. You extend, and nothing returns in the same way. So you extend again and again, because the interaction requires it, because stability depends on it, because you have learned that this is what keeps things smooth. The nervous system doesn't stop regulation. It simply starts doing it differently. In escort work, attunement becomes one-directional. You're tracking the other person, their tone, their energy, their mood before they have even spoken. What they need, what they want, and you adjust. In real time, constantly. A softened voice when tension appears, a warmer presence when distance is felt, a slight shift in rhythm when the pace needs to change. And none of this requires instruction. None of it requires a request. it happens before anything is said, because the system has learned to anticipate. But there's no equivalent requirement on the other side. The other person isn't tracking you in the same way. They're not adjusting to your energy. They're not reading your state and responding to it. They are receiving, and you are providing. This is not a criticism on anything involved. It's simply the structure of interaction. A structure that creates a very specific condition. Regulation without reciprocity. And what the nervous system does with that condition is what this episode is about. So let's make this specific. You're in a booking. Everything is going well. Nothing is wrong. And yet your system is doing something very precise. The first moment is at the beginning, before anything has been asked. You walk in, and within seconds you have already registered something. His energy, the specific quality of his mood tonight, whether he's tensed or relaxed, whether he needs to be drawn out or contained, whether this will require more warmth or more space. You haven't not spoken yet, and the adjustment has already begun. The second moment is in the middle, when something shifts in him. A slight change in tone, a moment of tension that wasn't there before, or a softening. And your system registers it and responds. A small calibration, so subtle that he doesn't notice, so automatic that you barely notice. The third moment is at the end, when it's over, and the role can theoretically be set down. But something in the system stays slightly on, slightly adjusted, slightly extended toward a person who is no longer there. These 3 moments are not dramatic. They are not crises. They are the mechanism in motion. And the reason it matters to recognize them doing the work is not to stop them. You cannot stop them in the moment. The system is too fast for that. The reason it matters is that recognition changes the relationship to the pattern, not the pattern itself, the relationship to it. When you can say, there it is, that's the tracking beginning, that's the adjustment happening, that's the system doing what it's learned to do. Something shifts, not in behavior, in awareness. You cannot stop what you cannot see. But once you can see it, it's no longer invisible. I remember thinking I was good at reading people, better than most. And I was, but it wasn't a gift. It was practice. Thousands of hours of practice. Of reading someone before they spoke. Of adjusting before they knew they needed it. Of keeping everything smooth, without them even seeing how much work that was. So, what actually happens when the nervous system is exposed to one-way attunement repeatedly? It learns. Not consciously, not through decision, but through repetition. And what it learns is efficiency. Because the nervous system is always optimizing, always looking for the most efficient way to maintain stability. And when the same pattern repeats, the system finds a shorter route, less fluctuation, faster responses, less internal noise before the adjustment happens. The system isn't trying to feel more, it's trying to manage more, with less internal movement. And at first, this feels like strength. You can stay steady in situations that used to affect you more. You don't get pulled in as easily. You adjust faster, recover quicker, and nothing about that feels wrong. In fact, it often feels like control. But something else is happening underneath that. Something the system doesn't announce. Because efficiency is not neutral. Efficiency is a reorganization. The system is not just getting faster at what it does. It changes what it does. When the nervous system reduces variability, it's not just reducing the difficult fluctuations, it's reducing all fluctuations. The uncomfortable ones and the ones that were never uncomfortable at all. The quiet pleasure of being surprised. The soft opening that happens when someone genuinely moves you. The particular quality of being seen by someone and feeling it land. These aren't dramatic experiences, they're subtle ones. And subtle experiences are the first to go quiet when the system is optimizing for stability. Not because they disappear, because they require a level of openness that efficiency slowly reduces. And when openness reduces, experience narrows, not suddenly, incrementally, almost imperceptibly. There was a moment when I realized I wasn't moved by things the way I used to be. Not upset, not numb, just less. A film that would have made me cry 2 years before. I watched it without feeling much. I noticed it, but I didn't worry about it. I thought maybe I was just more mature, more grounded. I didn't understand yet that my system had simply gotten very good at not being moved. And that's the part that makes this so difficult to see. Because efficiency feels like improvement. Faster regulation feels like emotional intelligence. Less fluctuation feels like stability. Reduced openness feels like maturity. And maturity is valued. It's praised. It's what people mean when they say, "You're so composed. Nothing seems to rattle you. You handle things so well." And those observations aren't wrong. The composure is real. The stability is real. The capacity to handle pressure is real. But underneath that composure, something has also changed. The range has narrowed. The movement had decreased. The speed of return to baseline has increased. And all of that feels like growth. The most important shifts are the ones that feel like nothing has changed. So the system doesn't flag this. There's no internal alarm. No moment where the nervous system signals something is different here. Because from the system's perspective, nothing is wrong. Everything is working. Everything is stable. Everything is, by every internal measure, better than before. And because it feels better, it's not questioned, not examined, not interrupted. It simply continues. There's a specific physical quality to one-way attunement. And it's worth describing precisely, because it's easy to explain intellectually and harder to recognize in the body. Well, picture an evening, hours of being present, hours of tracking, hours of adjusting. The interaction has gone well. Nothing difficult happened, nothing crossed the line. And yet, when it ends, the body doesn't immediately release. There's a particular quality of tiredness, not the tiredness of physical exertion, not the tiredness of emotional distress. Something more specific, a low, quiet depletion, like a battery that has been running on a steady drain for a very long time. Not empty, but not full either. And the restoring takes longer than it should. Sleep helps, but doesn't fully restore. A day off helps, but something remains slightly on. Not alert, not anxious, just not fully off. This is one-way attunement in the body. Not crisis, not collapse. A chronic, quiet extension that doesn't fully return. I used to think I just needed more sleep or more days off. And they helped. But there was always something left. A kind of tiredness that didn't have a source. I wasn't sad, I wasn't burned out. It was just slightly less restored than I thought it should be. Every time. And here's the part that matters most. The nervous system doesn't know when the work ends. It only knows what has been repeated, what has been practiced, what has been reinforced. So, when one-way attunement becomes familiar, the system doesn't keep it inside the work. It carries it forward into other interactions, other relationships, other moments of closeness. You're at a dinner with a friend and you notice you're tracking, reading their energy, adjusting your tone, softening something before it's needed. Not because your friend requires it, not because the situation demands it, but because that's what the system has learned to do. Inside closeness, inside connection, inside any interaction that involves another person. And this is where something quietly confusing begins. Because relationships outside the work start to feel like work too. Not obviously, not dramatically, just slightly more effortful than they should, slightly more draining than expected, slightly less restoring. And the most confusing part is that nothing appears to be wrong. The relationship is fine, the people involved are fine, the interaction is fine, and yet afterward, the body doesn't quite release, doesn't quite return to baseline, doesn't quite feel the way it did before this became the system's default. I started avoiding people in my personal life, and I didn't fully understand why. These were people who were good to me, people who cared. But my system responded to every interaction the same. Track, adjust, stabilize. Without asking whether it was needed. Without asking whether the other person needed that from me at all. It just did what it had learned to do. I want to be clear about something. What we are describing is not damage. It's not weakness. And it's not something that went wrong. It's adaptation. The nervous system adapted to a real environment, a real set of demands, a real requirement for sustained, one-directional regulation. And it did what nervous systems do. It found the most efficient way to meet those demands. It reorganized, it optimized. It got very good at something very specific. That's not malfunction. That's intelligence. The kind of intelligence that keeps systems functioning under sustained pressure. The kind that allows continuity when full emotional exposure would have been too costly. But adaptation always has a shape. And the shape of this adaptation is one-directional efficiency. Faster tracking, faster adjusting, less internal fluctuation, less openness to being moved, less ease in receiving what others offer back. And when that shape becomes the default, it shows up everywhere, not only inside the work, but inside every space where closeness is possible. It's not intensity that changes you. It's direction repeated over time. So, what does it mean to understand this? It doesn't mean something is broken. It doesn't mean the damage is permanent. It doesn't mean the relationship outside the work are lost. It means the system learned something specific. And systems that learned something can learn something else. But that learning requires one thing first: recognition. Seeing the pattern clearly, not as a flaw, not as evidence of something broken, but as the shape of adaptation. An intelligent adaptation that made sense in one context and is now operating beyond it. And recognition is where everything begins. Not by forcing change, not by trying harder to feel, not by pushing the system back open, but by understanding what it learned and what conditions allow it to learn something different. So, if you recognize yourself in what we have described today, the automatic tracking, the tiredness that doesn't fully resolve, the subtle effort in closeness that shouldn't require effort, the sense of being slightly less restored than you expected, let that recognition be information, not judgment, not self-criticism, not something to correct immediately, just information. Your system learned what was required. And over time, it organized itself around those demands. That's not failure. That's what nervous systems do. In the next episode, we are going to look at what happens when emotionally efficiency starts to narrow emotional range. Not as a problem, but as the next stage of the same process. Because what begins as efficiency eventually becomes the shape of your experience. When regulation moves in one direction, something begins changing underneath it. Quietly, gradually, without being named. And in the next episode, we are going to name it. This was episode 2 of the first season of the Psychologist for Escort podcast. What you carry has weight. Your body already knows that. Give it a moment before you move on.